But that fence is separating value systems. And that's what we've got to try and bridge. And we kind of have a captive audience with an anti-poaching unit. Poaching is one of the biggest threats to the biodiversity and to the functioning of a national park and the long-term integrity of the park. So, how do we arrest the social decay and the moral decay if all we're doing is training people to go in there with a militaristic attitude to defend the park against the people sitting on the boundary?
Hi everyone, I'm Petrus and welcome to WorldView. WorldView is a podcast where we explore everyone's perspectives on all things that can broaden our worldview. If you've watched any of our episodes so far and liked it, please consider liking this video, subscribing, and donating on Patreon. Today we're talking with Craig Spencer. Craig is the founder and CEO of Black Mambas, an anti-poaching organization made mostly up of women. The Black Mambas also strive to be more than that, being role models in their respective communities. Craig, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Petrus. It's nice to be here.
I'm really looking forward to this discussion, mainly because we've had the privilege, frankly, of talking to some pretty big, influential people in the conservation area in South Africa, or specifically, talking about conservation in South Africa and Africa, frankly, as a larger scheme. Among those were Lord Peter Hain that we talked with. He was quite passionate about and wrote I think he wrote a book about rhino poaching specifically in Africa and how absolutely prevalent it is and how big the serious the issue is. We also had the privilege of speaking very recently to John Rendell from the movie A Lion Called Christian, which you might have seen, the amazing conservation work he's done, more specifically on lions and so on and so forth in the past. And inspiration there is really cool. But to talk to you who, you're in the middle of this is like what you do every day. I just want to start off with asking, okay, so what are the Black Mambas? Like, what exactly is an anti-poaching organization? Because I don't know if everybody understands exactly what it is. Some people think that you're militants. Other people think that you're, purely conservationists. So, getting activism around it. What exactly is the Black Mambas?
Yeah, thanks, Petrus. It's a good question, and it's a difficult one to answer because the answer is not so simple. You've touched on a number of issues. We are trying to foster a team that ticks off all the blocks that you mentioned now earlier. There must be conservationists. We want to build resilience for the landscape. We want to make long-term investments in people. What is a Black Mamba? If I had to give you the basic answer to that, it's a young woman from the tribal community that's directly adjacent to the national park. I'm in the Greater Kruger National Park environment here, right on the Baluli at the boundary of Baluli, which is between Phalaborwa and Hoedspruit. And there's three communities sitting on the border. So it's a young woman from the community that is trained and deployed on the landscape to look after the wildlife. But they've got I might be speaking out of turn here now, but I think one of our failures in the past has been anti-poaching was a militarized institution, and the training and the entire ethos around it was this militaristic approach to stopping the hemorrhaging of the ivory poachers or rhino poachers or snare bushmeat poachers, whatever it might be. But when they go home, is there any knowledge transfer? Is there any change in behavior in the communities and so on? So we're trying to tick off all of those blocks. We don't want a team of soldiers. We want a team of conservationists with a soldiering background or a soldiering skill set, rather than have soldiers that you try to convince to become conservationists later. So that's the approach with the Mambas.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. I like that because there's so many elements to it. I mean, like you've mentioned now, it's not even that one-dimensional. I think the reason people have this perspective about anti-poaching organizations being a militant group is because that was the history of it. But nowadays, people realize, it doesn't really help if you just walk around and try and hunt poachers anymore, because when they come back, that's the job that they've done. They're hunters. They're not conservationists. They're not talking about the real issue in terms of how people perceive these animals and care for them. So in that role that you're playing is actually really interesting. You've briefly mentioned that it's 3 communities around the Kruger National Park that you operate in. Do you operate anywhere else, or do you work with other organizations that work elsewhere? It's like, where exactly do you operate? Only in the Kruger National Park?
Yeah, it's this is our focal area. It's actually on the boundary, so it's in the section that we call Baluli, which is part of the Association of Private Nature Reserves. So the Kruger Park expanded east and west. It's a multi-ownership model. So there's tribal land in here, there's private land. We border right up against the public Kruger National Park itself. And where we are, there's only 3 communities. But as you travel down the western boundary, all the way down to Nelspruit, it's 400 and something kilometers from the top to the bottom of the Kruger Park. And there's a whole bunch of these communities that have established along the boundaries for, historical reasons, the mining activities and so on and so on. And if we want to build resilience for the park, we can't just keep investing more and more into weaponry and, big barriers like fences, like the Berlin Wall kind of thing going up, to separate people. And I've always said that fence, the western boundary fence, is not separating people from the park, because anybody can come into the park. There's plenty of access gates, and it's quite cheap for South Africans. And there's even days where it's for free for South Africans to celebrate our national heritage and natural heritage. But that fence is separating value systems, and that's what we've got to try and bridge. And we kind of have a captive audience with an anti-poaching unit. Poaching is one of the biggest threats to the biodiversity and to the functioning of a national park and the long-term integrity of the park. So, how do we arrest the social decay and the moral decay if all we're doing is training people to go in there with a militaristic attitude to defend the park against the people sitting on the boundary? So trying to address a whole bunch of people, whilst you've got that captive audience, whilst you're already paying those salaries and investing in those people, why not see a much bigger return on that investment?
Yeah, and there's also more roles necessary. It's like the people that need to understand what the environment needs, what the animals need, what type of motivation can you perhaps supply to other sectors which might fund this type of preservation. It's like you need people that are in the park, but you also at the same time need people that talk to the community, understanding why these animals need to protect and why they're motivated. You also need people to talk to, the leaders of the park, the politicians, the people that have an influence in terms of how this works, especially on an international scale, since most of our poaching is actually exported in that regard. So you need to have a multi-layered education in terms of that environment.
This is correct.
So
I want to quickly jump in if you don't mind, Petrus. What's quite important, I've been in this industry for 24 years, and I've kind of watched the whole ethos, even the recruitment process and everything have changed, because the poaching pressure has just become such a big thing, whether it's abalone, down in the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape, or whether it's rhino poaching or pangolin poaching, whatever it is. So we recruited over time an entire range of force that was purely designed to address one particular issue. Now we started watching all the other, and the budget started doing this as well, because you're investing more and more into helicopter fuel and weaponry and sensors and tracking devices and all kinds of things. So it became a bit of an arms race, really. And, professional conservation managers were sitting back and saying, guys, where are we going with this? Are we actually just creating a little Palestine for wildlife? Or to use a terrible political reference, but how sustainable is this? We're not addressing the social decay and the moral decay that poaching brings along with it, with the false economies and so on. We've got to be smart about this. And when we send our ranger force home back to their families, the stories that they're telling to their kids are all about how cool your daddy is because he's got a machine gun and he jumps out of helicopters with a Belgian Malinois strapped to his chest and a pair of night vision goggles. Rather than when I started in this industry many moons ago, you would sit down and tell them and show them beautiful pictures of the sunsets and this is the hyenas calling at night and the elephants trumpeting and what have you. Those stories are gone. It's now about I'm so freaking cool because I jump out of a helicopter and I shoot at people. So we're kind of changing the entire ethos of what a national park stands for.
Yeah. And also the other thing I want to talk about, and you can correct me on this, but I'd say from my perspective, at least somebody who isn't, close to the park, I'm down here in the Cape, one of the biggest moral issues is actually apathy. Like people don't care. And one of the reasons they don't care is they just simply don't see this actually happening. They don't see the pervasiveness of rhino poaching. When, for example, I've been fortunate enough to be in the Kruger National Park, I think like 3 or 4 times in my life. I know friends from, up north in Johannesburg and Pretoria who go yearly. It's like a family tradition type thing. But, even those are once a year is enough to see the change in the populations of rhinos specifically, but also just tourists, they come once in a lifetime down. So the exposure to this problem you can correct me if I'm wrong, feels like it's a bit localized in terms of the people that see it and then care about it. So in terms of this environment, what's the best way in which you can put this type of poaching and the extensiveness thereof into context for people? Like make them understand like how bad is this really?
Yeah, it's difficult if you can't see it, you can't really quantify it. And as you say, these snapshot safaris is all people get. So yeah, that is a difficult question to answer. But if I can give you some statistics, when the rhino poaching started in about 2010, but it really started picking up in 2012, and we had more rhinos than we had elephants in the Kruger Park.
Really?
And yeah, this is a fact. There were no rhinos in the Kruger National Park in the up until the 70s, until they were reintroduced from Umfolozi in KwaZulu-Natal. This is not the first time the rhinos have been persecuted to near extinction by poaching. And because of really applaudable conservation efforts from the South Africans and the National Park Service, the population grew and expanded, and it was really a massive success story. We also got to remember that the Kruger National Park is only 3% of South Africa's landmass. And this is our Swiss bank account for our big five and our unique selling point in the international tourism arena, apart from Table Mountain and Cape of Good Hope and all that sort of thing. But if you look at the statistics, it's the Kruger National Park, and it's got a massive following. It's got goodwill, just like any good business should have. It's more than 100 years old. It caters for every kind of user group that you can possibly imagine. You can go four-by-four-ing in the Kruger Park. You can go camping. You can go and stay in a luxury lodge. You can do just about, you can go for a walk, with an armed guard and so on and so on. So we cater for all the needs. If you want to go to Botswana, and let's be honest now, it's hard to compete with Botswana's wildlife treasures that they have in the Okavango Delta and so on. However, you need Bear Grylls strapped to your roof rack with a satellite telephone, and a backup helicopter behind you and a really responsible 4x4 driver. If you want, so that's a niche market, and it's very popular, but nothing can compete with it. Nowhere in the sub-Saharan African context, in the SADC region, shall we say, can you actually compete with what the Kruger Park offers. And we've got that. And we should be guarding it absolutely jealously, especially because it's only 3%. And I ask of the people of South Africa, firstly, why is it that most of our support and rumblings about the rhino poaching is coming from abroad, from the Northern Hemisphere? Why is that where most of the support comes from? There's a lot of support in South Africa, absolutely, and there's some specialist groups that are focused primarily on the rhino poaching problem. But then I also ask you this question. What are we going to do when we run out of rhinos and the poaching problem persists? Do you think the poacher is going to go back to pushing a wheelbarrow and planting cabbages? I think not. He's driving BMWs now with flat screen TVs and all that sort of thing. And where it started off with, maybe a dodgy guy coming in after his normal work shift on a mine or something, making an extra buck. Now this has become a lucrative trade, and their lifestyles have improved tremendously, and they've got used to those lifestyles. Plus, the moral decay in those communities means that it's no longer just Bob that sneaks out at night and goes and plugs a rhino. He's now taking the school teacher who's got a vehicle that will drop him off and making 10,000 bucks. The kids are carrying the stuff in backpacks and leaving it under trees, for 1,000 rand or a lollipop or whatever it might be. So that's when I talk about the moral or the social decay in the community, it's the guns hidden under that guy's floorboard. The traditional healers are now making money from selling traditional medicine to protect people against anti-poaching units and so on. So the community is involved. And now we sit with this Robin Hood shenanigans where he's the hero, I'm the sheriff of Nottingham, and the Sherwood Forest is the Kruger National Park. But Robin Hood was a bloody poacher. Let's put things into context now. It's 3%. It's not a lot to ask. And if that is and rhino poaching is not just affecting the Kruger Park. Look what's happening in Umfolozi. Look what's happening in Pinda. And even in the Western Cape, there've been big rhino losses. The people are breaking into museums and stealing it off the shelves and so on. But if we want rhinos to perform their ecological function, be part of an open system, be part of the big five package, both ecologically and economically and what have you, we have to address this problem. The rhinos are going to run out. And yes, we can buy them from a farmer next door that farms them and put them back on the landscape. But what's going to happen when the poacher needs to put new tires on his BMW? Is he going to say, oh, well, boo, I'll go knock off a liquor store? No, he's going to say, well, you know what, a pangolin can fetch a huge amount of money. Or look at all the beautiful ivory running around on the elephants, etc.
Yeah.
That's my concern.
The thing is, that's the part that always surprises me. Is this, you have something which started as somebody making an extra buck given to somebody that pays decently for it, right? So an extra detail, and then that extra detail grew into that person wanting more because he found more people, that you convinced more people that it's valuable, and you have the scenario where it kind of just keeps on going, keeps on rolling. Like you have people that sell this, convince more people that it's valuable, and therefore drives up the demand, and the supply in terms of what we have now is getting more and more limited. But the real question is, why was it valuable in the first place? It's like why is this thing, which for some reason, at least, ivory from elephants, for example, has a certain value, and the horn from a rhino is like literally what's on your nails, so that intrinsically doesn't have value. Like, why intrinsically did this get value in the first place? Where did this start? How much was it worth?
The end user of all of these things is not innocent in this game. The supply and demand chain is going to the east, but the previous, if we put it into context, the previous attack or assault, or whatever you want to call it, on the rhinos globally, the biggest end user was actually the Yemenis. If we have to go back, I don't know if you remember as far back as Operation Baikonus in Namibia. That's how old I am. Etc. When the rhinos were pushed to the brink of extinction, the end user in Yemen was using them for dagger handles. There's a rite of passage for adulthood. The young boys got a dagger with a rhino horn handle, and of course, the Chinese traditional medicine was still a big thing. WWF bought a reprieve for the rhinos by convincing the Chinese Traditional Medicine Council to utilize the horns of the Saiga antelope that lives on the Mongolian steppes, which is Russian, Chinese territory. There were about 2.5 million Saiga antelope on the landscape. And one of my favorite quotes, I think it was in the New Science magazine. I can't remember right now. But anyway, one of the most famous quotes for any ecologist or biologist is where they said it's the fastest extinction of a land mammal in the history of the world. 2.5 Saiga antelope, because you cannot meet the demand. And this is my argument against legalizing trade or 3D printing of horns and what have you. You're perpetuating demand. And that is a user group, the end user, that is in the highest income bracket. If you put it on a little pyramid, so let's say 1% of the Chinese community and the Vietnamese community can actually afford rhino horn at that quantity. And so there's no ways that we can hope to it's a big population of people, and they're not just living in China; they're scattered all over the globe. Imagine if we made it attainable to the rest of the population, or even just one notch down. So let's say even 2% can now afford it, because we've opened up trade and we're allowing 3D horns to move onto the market or whatever it might be. Can you just imagine if 2% of that massive 1 point whatever billion population strong could now afford rhino horn? We would never be sitting and having this discussion. We would be lamenting about the extinction of the rhino. Rhinos are not only here in South Africa or in the sub-Saharan African context, they are also persecuted in Nepal and Vietnam and all over the show, and in Indonesia. There's some seriously endangered rhino species. They're much more endangered than the black rhinos that we have here in sub-Saharan Africa. And they're also under pressure. It's, I want to give you another statistic. When they did the aerial census for elephants in Mozambique a few years ago, going back about 10 years now, is that how long it is? Approximately 7 to 10 years ago. Okay. 48% of all the elephants that they counted were carcasses in Mozambique. Mozambique is over there. I can pretty much see it from my viewing deck. At the rate of exploitation, 96 elephants were dying in sub-Saharan Africa a day. That's IUCN figures, not mine. Okay. If that problem moved across the border, Kruger Park is 6 kilometers wide at its widest point. If that problem moved across our border, we would have had 200 and something days of elephants left in the Kruger National Park. This is not just a rhino problem. The rhinos have brought the poaching problem into the public arena. For some reason, you can't, well, I know some of the reasons, but they pull your water pipes out and bash your crops around, but you can't generate much sympathy for an elephant. It's really tough to generate sympathy for an abalone, for example, unless you have a house on the coast and you don't like the people running in front of your house and whatever. How do you generate, why is it now suddenly that the rhinos have generated so much sympathy globally and internally? And we must capitalize on that. We must protect those rhinos. We must say, we must find what are the root causes. We must address those root causes, because I promise you, when the rhinos are gone, something else is going to go. That's a rant.
There's so much layers to this, which I wish we had like all the time to unpack it thoroughly. But the things that I wanted to highlight that you said was specifically that if you legalize the trade or you open up the trade to more diverse options, it doesn't reduce the amount of deaths in rhinos and elephants and the ones that we're concerned about right now. It just opens up the amount of deaths to more things, even if those were made artificially. Like, for example, like you said, the Traditional Health Council in China was convinced to use different horns and that population was wiped out. Why is the life of an antelope in that case less worth than that of a rhino? I mean, it's perpetuating the problem, or placing the problem on the other side of the fence simply because it isn't your side of the fence in that regard. So
yeah,
in this case, I mean, I agree with you that the end user is definitely at fault here as well, but how do you solve that?
I know, Petros, I want to add another angle to that. Traditional medicine is based in belief, superstition, metamagical thought, this sort of thing. You will have a tough time convincing a user to take something that has been farm grown or 3D printed. So you're going to have to smuggle it in, and you're going to have to create an entire market for these fake products. Like you get Nike shoes, but they're not really Nike because it's called like Nike or whatever, So, and we all know that the Chinese are good at this. So and it's syndicated. This is a syndicated operation. It's linked to rare minerals and all that, and the illegal trade in rare minerals. There is no way that we as conservation practitioners on the ground can condone the opening of trade from farm grown or whatever, if their excuse or if the banner that they're hiding behind is to try and reduce the poaching pressure on the wild rhinos. I won't buy it, and I think it's purely economically driven, profit motivated, and they're hiding behind the thin veneer of conservation. That's my personal opinion. I'll probably get into a lot of trouble for saying that, because I get into a lot of trouble for saying a lot of things, which is why I hide here. But that is the reality. There's no two bones about it. You're either a conservationist or an economist. And if the two get together and sit around the same table, we will agree that this is a profit-motivated venture. Yeah. It's not there to assist anti-poaching.
And like you said, it's a syndicated system. So there's a lot of other industries that tie into this anti-poaching. I mean, if you lay, for example, like you said, in Mozambique, the horrible situation there with the elephants exists mainly because the infrastructure and the logistics for able to generate that amount of trade, generate that amount of resources that's being exported, has been built up. And the second you build up that kind of logistics that kind of go around the rules, that play around with legal and exporting loopholes, then you've created that environment for a number of other industries as well. And obviously they will make use of it because the infrastructure is enabled. So the cost of entry is lower. So in this regard, may I ask, I think it might be a bit of an ambiguous question, but like the question that people then kind of have is like, okay, how high up does this go? Is it purely like the guy in the tent in the middle of the wilderness that's like figuring out logistics of where his trucks has to go to which animals to shoot? Or is this like, suit and tie level? I mean, how does one explain that?
It's another controversial question, but let's give it a go. First of all, at level 1, my Black Mambas, we only really get to target the level 1 poacher, the guy right down at the bottom. So, even if you do manage to capture somebody and extract information from his cell phone or whatever it might be, you will find that information is very horizontal. It doesn't go up the pyramid. He's got a pay-as-you-go, old Nokia 6110 kind of thing, and he's got a 5 rand air bundle, whatever you call it. and he just gets sent a text message. So you're not going to get much out of this chap that you've got on level 1. But I believe after all of these years, no poacher can be successful on this or any other landscape unless he has inside help. It's so uncanny that we have professional people that are employed to monitor the location of rhinos and look after them every day, and they struggle to find them. I mean, this is a massive landscape. They must run around all the show. Yet a poacher can come in, avoid the patrols, assassinate a rhino, because pretty much like an assassination event, and get out undetected. You know, it's very suspicious. And we've shown statistically that if you find one person that is corrupted and you take him out of the system, you buy yourself up to 18 months of no poaching activity on the landscape. So I would say that the corruption problem is sitting actually down here, where we're aiding and abetting the level 1 poachers. Then the next level up is apathy in the police and with the detectives and so on. It's a very rare crime in South Africa. You know, we sit here and we say how bad the rhino poaching, what have you, is, but statistically speaking, it's a very rare crime. And it's really hard for us to convince the local police stations and what have you to throw their weight behind it when they're dealing with so many other social issues, you know, with domestic violence and, you know, all the things that you read about every day in the paper. If you go to court and you sit there and wait for your poaching case to come up, you have to wait for a long time because the court roll is so full of, you know, proper, what you would consider crimes that the country should be dealing with. It's also really hard when you call a policeman in the middle of the night and say, I heard a gunshot on my landscape and I'm convinced a poacher has taken a rhino out. So going, let me know if you catch him. What are they going to do about it? Where are they going to go? You know, if you lay a docket on the table in front of a public prosecutor or a detective, there's so many flaws with our Roman Dutch law and our Criminal Procedures Act. How do you prove that that weapon that your dog found the next day, because he's a sniffer dog, was linked to that guy? The ballistics prove that it killed that rhino, but how do you prove that guy pulled the trigger? You know, so we've got to put things into context here, which is why the Black Mamba model is different to everybody else's. We know that the detection, pursuit, apprehension, and conviction model is, I don't want to say doomed to fail, but it's got so many hoops that you have to jump through, that if our objective is to protect the rhinos, then we actually have to tackle it from a different perspective and maybe just disrupt the landscape, make it undesirable and unprofitable for a poacher. But to get back to a corruption thing, there's 2 levels. Somebody's helping the poachers get in and out of this place undetected. That's what they want to do. They want to get in and out without being caught. Even if they go home empty-handed, you know, they want to know, how do I avoid being arrested or chased around by an anti-poaching team? Secondly, that stuff's got to leave this country, man. You know, the end user is sitting on the other side of the freaking China Sea. You know, how does it escape, firstly, our customs and excise officials' scrutiny? And then secondly, how does it in China when they've got some pretty good laws and rules, and they've made some pretty big commitments to the world? You know, when that whole Vietnamese border is so porous, you know, it comes in through Vietnam and it just slips through onto logging trucks and all kinds of things. During this lockdown period, you can see that a lot of those massive big hauls that they've confiscated now is because nothing was leaving the shore. So I suppose the customs and excise enforcement officers had a lot of time to go through and inspect and so on. And then, what is this? Here's a bundle of rhino horns buried in a box labeled baby food or something, you know. So I think the corruption, to answer your question, goes all the way up, but in the middle is an apathy. I believe we've got the political will in this country to stop it. You know, when I speak to the guys in the higher echelons in our government, they really, really don't need this embarrassment. They really want this problem to go away. You know, but nobody can offer a silver bullet. There is no silver bullet. You're dealing with multiple role players on the landscape here. A lot of them are coming actually from Mozambique. You know, so diplomatically, how do you address that? You know, we can't declare war or send drones flying over a neighboring country and so on and so on. There are huge issues that I believe our politicians are sitting and saying, somebody tell me how I must deal with this. So I would say we've got the political will. There is an apathy in the law enforcement arena because of the burden on our law enforcement practitioners to address the other critical issues that we're dealing with socially.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
mean,
know if I've answered the question, but
you've
there's
answered
so
very,
much
very
pressure
thoroughly.
on the field rangers. Petros, there's so much pressure on the field rangers to keep it together because this is the first line of defense. If we fail, there's no safety nets.
Yeah. I mean, you've answered it so thoroughly. There's a lot of details I want people to really, really think about in terms of what you said. I mean, there's so many difficult layers to this. When the one that just stood out to me that you mentioned was to get the stuff out of the country, you need to have custom officers that miss crates or don't inspect things properly, and that is a number of different layers. I mean, sure, it can be corruption, that's definitely one of the elements, but it can also just be they're working with volume, so they're understaffed, and there's apathy there that they can't have. And on the other hand, like with the law enforcement, they're dealing with human beings that have life-threatening issues, especially environment around our mines, which very difficult to control. So it's completely understandable that they're not interested in terms of animal lives, but more interested in human lives. And then, of course, we're back on the lower level. You've got these people that, like you said, they have like the Nokia 3310, that they're getting, 1,000 Rand for this. And it's a small fraction in terms of what the end user finally pays for it. But the point being is they're seeing this as a way to feed their family. So there's a lot of complex, difficult layers. Like even if you nail that guy that shot the actual bullet and then got the horn, even if you nail that guy, like you said, the net is a lot bigger. So people would then say, okay, sure, but just go one level up. Like you said, if you can get somebody that's corrupt on the inside, that's showing these people how to get in and out undetected, it's 18 months that you probably don't have, poaching in that specific area. So people say like, okay, we're not going to reach to the communities. Let's just rather go for the corruption. I mean, that's a whole can of worms to open up and to try and deal with. Whereas your strategy is actually to teach the community more about this conservation and why it's important to care for these animals, and therefore making the level 1 person less motivated to do this, for example. But like you said, it's multi-layered.
Yeah, spot on. If we think that if we look at our arrest rate, because everything has got to be tested and tried, and we can't just be throwing money at something and expecting a result, but we're not actually measuring whether we're getting results. So if I told you that in the early scourges of rhino poaching, we would lose 56 carcasses to 1 arrest, then you have to say that that model is flawed. If your model says I must detect, pursue, apprehend, and prosecute, then if we get a successful prosecution, it could take up to 5 years. Therefore, you've lost the deterrent angle to the thing. It's forgotten now. You can't, and our courts are clogged. So therefore what I'm saying is, I'm not saying you can't have that. You have to have that aspect. You have to remove those poachers from the system one way or another. But what we wanted to do is say, we can't put all of our eggs in those baskets. The landscape has changed tremendously. In the old days, we had a double-layered fence on the Mozambique border because of the conflict in Mozambique. The same on the Zimbabwean side. And what have you. The Kruger Park boundary was well protected with 5 access control points, no cell phone coverage in the park. Tourism was great, but it's not anywhere near the volume that you've got now. It's a peace park. It's so the ethos has changed. The boundaries are porous. We've got a lot of private ownership. Mines have sprung up all over the show. There's telephone wires, there's railway lines going through the park. The landscape is compromised, much more so than it was before, which makes it much easier for a poacher and much more difficult for an anti-poacher. And especially in our socio-economic environment now, where we're sitting and we're struggling to pay salaries that are competitive, and resources. And a field ranger can sometimes live for weeks out there in a little foxhole or whatever with the rations that he can carry on his back, and struggles to cook it because you don't want to give your location away with a fire or whatever. You can just imagine the lifestyle out there. And you're living with like a permanent stress level. Your cortisol levels must be so high all the time because there's lions and there's elephants and you're under pressure and your boots have got to be polished and you're on parade and you're getting shouted at and whatever. So you can just imagine what these guys have got to go through. And with such low success, where's the incentive for them? So we needed a different model. We had to say, how can we address the poaching problem, secure a population of rhinos in this area, make it undesirable, unprofitable, dangerous, whatever, for a poacher to come in to this landscape. Because the only way to deter crime is actually to increase the risk. But the risk does not necessarily have to be apprehension and prosecution. The risk can also be, I came in, I wasted my time, and I went home empty-handed. I invested all of this in the traditional healer. I've got to pay him off. I've got to pay my informants inside the park. I've got to pay the little granny in the house to bury the gun under a mat or whatever. You know, I've got to get dropped off and picked up, so I've got to pay somebody with a vehicle. Blah, 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 blah. So I've invested into this operation, and I came back empty-handed. You know, oh dear, what's this? I must try again. But I went in at that specific time because it was full moon and I could see where I was going and whatever. And that field ranger, that's my buddy that I pay, was on duty and so on. Now I'm forced to go in with no moon. I have to use a torch, which exposes me. You know, the teacher with the car is not available. So I have to compromise myself by asking someone else who might be on my side and tip me off. You know, so we're closing the optimum windows for the poachers by disrupting the landscape. We haven't fired a single bullet, but we've made it difficult for them to poach. And then they expose themselves because they're in suboptimal times. When we started with this, the poachers were living on our land. We were horrified to find their camps and things. And whoosh, these guys have actually been living under our noses, and they can shoot during the daytime. You know, there's no restrictions for these guys. You know, so eventually over time, and with the Black Mambas, obviously, you know, we closed down the entrance gates. You can't come in and out, and technology has helped us tremendously, and so on. We've just made it difficult. But the main thing is when those Mamba Rangers, and there's 36 of them, when they go home, when they were employed, they were young, like 18-year-old girls, and now a lot of them are young mothers. They're married and what have you, and they've got little families, and they've become the go-to girls in the community. They've got training far above and beyond how to sit on an observation post and night vision goggles and to drive a 4x4 and dodge an elephant and that sort of thing. They also got like trauma first aid training, how to deal with children's illnesses and so on. So they are the people that the community goes to and says, hey, can you help me? They've planted vegetable gardens for the community, which was great during this COVID time. We didn't have that. There have been some serious shenanigans because they don't want the people to have to turn to poaching because it will make their job twice as difficult to say, Uncle Bob, you know, you're from my village, man, but you're setting snares. You know, they're in the schools. They've got 10 primary schools that they're dealing with every day. There's 7 of them that just go to these schools every day. That's what they do. Put the kids on parade, and it's like a whole thing. And they've got their little lesson plans, and they show them how snares work and what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing, and what have you. And that's won the hearts and the minds of not just the tribal authorities, but the people in their communities. And they don't carry weapons. That's why they accept it. They're not seen as a risk or a threat.
Yeah, I mean, it genuinely is really, really inspiring, and I think to a lot of people that don't understand the South African traditional culture or traditional environment that these women grow up in, they might see this as incredibly empowering. But in a sense, they're the ones that are also most involved in their communities. I mean, just as a perspective, the reason why you chose women from these communities that live around the Kruger National Park. I mean, you've mentioned now all the things that they get involved in. It just gives a really insight as to why these people are sometimes the best equipped to do this. They're the best equipped to go into these communities and then bring that stuff back. I mean, is that a culture perspective that you started out with? Is that something you learned along the way? Or what made you choose, okay, these women are the women for the job?
Yeah, Petrus, this is a very good question. I get asked it quite a lot. And then I actually got criticized recently for saying what I'm going to say now. But this is the reality. In the traditional tribal communities, the young women are the primary caregivers. That's the default role that they take on. You know, and if I want to make an investment and see a rapid return on that investment, then I must invest in the primary caregivers because I'm getting a multi-generational return on that. Now, they're going to be young mothers. Most of them are now. They're going to have children. They will eventually retire and sit at home and look after the children of their children. You know, so I'm getting that multi-generational output by investing and empowering these young ladies. And we have to celebrate the fact that they're women. It would be a huge fail for us if we said we trained young women to be men. You know, look at me, I'm so cool because I managed to get them to do what a man can do. No, then go get men, celebrate the values that women bring into this arena. And it's that caring and nurturing. Who's looking after the little chicks that hatch out of the eggs? Who's looking after the little goats? Who's looking after the household and so on? If you want to do a picket inspection, then you go to the Black Mamba picket. The place is squeaky clean, because that's their living environment. The uniform. We celebrate the fact that they are women, and women bring value to this arena that we have sadly lost over time. It became a very male-dominated, patriarchal kind of last Bastille for us Land Rover drivers, kind of thing, and so on. And I firmly believe that we have lost the values in policy, strategy, legislation, everything. One of my funniest examples of this is we are so ill-equipped to deal with recruiting women in this arena. When I send them to the training camp, the first group that came in, it's pretty basic. It's a basic training militarized camp, and the showers are open, the toilets are open. They have to, and they're very embarrassed and so on. And I thought, shit, our facilities are not actually even designed for this. The uniforms, you try and find uniforms that are made in women's sizes. Some of these ladies have got little size 5 feet. For example, I struggled to find combat boots in that size. I had to import them. I'm not even joking. So we're not kitted for this. We're not geared for this. Another example is, in the past, in my previous history, we would deploy men and we would confiscate their cell phones so that they can't leak information out to poachers and what have you. But that means for 21 days, they are isolated and cannot communicate with their families or their friends or anything like that. So they became little prisoners of ours during the time that they were on the landscape. And then when they go home, then they have to tell the stories, but they've forgotten half of what, and la, 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 and so on. You can't put a young mother in the field and then deny her the privilege of talking to her children every night before they go to bed and what have you. Hence our breaking of the mold. If I give you a cell phone, I promise you if you use it on duty, you're going to get into trouble unless there's an emergency at home. But I insist that when you've got the time, you send pictures and things to your kids and your family to show them how cool your job is. This is mom, and they do. They send little selfies. This is your mom driving the Land Rover. Look at me now. Look at that herd of elephants. Isn't it cool? So that's part of the investment that I'm making. I would be shooting myself in the foot if I said you can't communicate with your family until you go home. I would be losing that potential investment.
Yeah, it just goes to show exactly what your focus is in terms of away from the traditional way, the way that you've broken the mold, the way that you're actually actively working in the community to get these people to be more motivated. And I genuinely think that, like you said, that the primary caregivers, so the people that they care about, they're going to tell about this job. They're going to make them motivated. So you're intrinsically already training the mentality for future generation to make this a sustainable model. Because I feel like if you have a situation like you just mentioned, where you send men into conservation for 21 days without communication, that's something people get burned out on. Like that's something that people get a lot of frustrations about. They go back home and it's 21 days they've been without their family. Things have changed, things have happened that they have to learn about. They're always on the second step behind the things that they actually really care about, the motivations. So that's what doesn't make it sustainable. You have to make it sustainable for generations, because the animals aren't just going to be here in our life. They're going to be here in our children's lives and our children's lives. I'd very much like my nieces and nephews to go to Kruger National Park and be able to enjoy this, and their children to enjoy this, because otherwise, what are we leaving them? In this regard, I want to, before we talk about specifically how people can support the Black Mambas, I want to talk about a moment to actually appreciate the achievements of the Black Mambas, so that people understand what are the actual changes that they've made. So I know you've mentioned that they've helped start schools, they're in school environments, they're in social environments where they build this up. But do you have some other things with people, quantifiable things that you can tell people, like saying, this is the difference that the Black Mambas made, and this is what you're supporting, when we later talk about how they can be supported?
Yeah, thanks, Petrus. That's actually very important. We need to evaluate whether we are doing the right thing or not. This can't be Craig Spencer's personal project. We get external, because that's the problem with conservation, I must just tell you, is that it's personality driven. So you get all these personalities that start these projects all over the show, and they run with it because they've got an ethos or a philosophy that they want to drive home. But where's the evidence to suggest that it's actually achieving any objectives? that we might have set out. I have to bring in external evaluators. So we do have, we put it out there to universities and things all over the show, and they come and they check it out, and they do their research, however they do it, and then they present us with a paper and say, this is where you're succeeding and this is where you're failing. And one of the most fascinating things, we were oblivious to how much poaching we had on the landscape. So I started 2013, I deployed 6 young ladies as a test project, as a demonstration project to show the world, because everybody was like, oh, you've got to be crazy. You can't put aunties out there, they will never survive. It's too hot and they've got to walk far and they've got to carry this backpack and so on and so on. And I thought, in my observations with the ladies in these communities, who's carrying the water can on their heads? 20 liters. That's heavier than a jerry can of fuel. Plus they've got a baby on the back and they're pushing a wheelbarrow full of firewood. They've got to walk all the way down to the river and dodge the crocodiles and all kinds of things to wash the clothes. And they're doing this repeatedly all the time. So I'm telling you that these ladies are better at dealing with the heat, walking far, carrying heavy weights, and so on and so on. They are damn sight better. And not a single one of them dropped off the training course, not once. And I've had 4 teams that we've trained up through. Because
have you had a 100% success rate for training?
100% success rate. There's one that broke her ankle during the training, so she ended up sitting in the operations center. Shame, bless her soul. It's not her fault. Well, she probably shouldn't have fallen. But, they are tough because they're also mentally tough. I think they have to put up with just saying, I'm hungry and I'm tired and I've got to look after all the kids. But at the same time, I've still got to get water and firewood. So I just got to do it anyway. So they've built up this mental resilience to the hardships that Africa throws at you here. So the training course was easy for them. The thing that they struggled with was the interaction with the big 5, the wildlife. So that's quite a big part of our training now. We have partners that help us out, like eco training and whatever. They're really good at that. But to answer your question, to give you one anecdotal example, when I deployed that 6 on this landscape, before them I had one guy on a bicycle with a knopkiri and a walkie-talkie, and this was our anti-poaching guy, old Derek, a fantastic human being. And he would ride around and say, no, everything is sharp, and maybe take a snare out and everything. We'd take a picture and put it on Facebook and say, look, we found a snare. Holy Moses, when those mambas moved in here, we had to get flatbed trucks, hired flatbed trucks to remove the snares that they pulled out of the bush. That's how bad it was. They found 4 poachers' camps where the poachers had been living under our noses. The fire pits, the ash was so high that they'd been there for weeks. The meat is hanging in the trees under the dense foliage in certain little places where the vultures can't find it, because we always look for vultures and that leads us to something, And we realized, wow, this landscape's been hectically under poaching pressure for a long time. How embarrassing is that? And black rhinos, lions, cheetahs, wild dogs, all these critically endangered species with snares on. They had broken free and they run around and it's cutting into their necks and so on. And the mamas will sit with them all day, waiting for the vet to arrive in that heat, following them, not hurting them by pushing them, getting too close, etc., till the vet can give them a dart and take the snare off, whatever. And then they worked out where the threat was coming from, and went through all the little houses and compounds and things and found out who was hiding this under their beds and who was keeping that in their freezer. And so the problem stopped. I went from a huge poaching problem, 96% reduction in poaching in 6 months on that 10,000 hectare section that I deployed those 6, just those 6. And then I was like, wow.
On a 10,000 hectare location.
Yeah, took them 6 months. But it's about clever working. You can't cover 10,000 hectares. That's impossible. But they would say a person can't walk far either. So if there's a little house on the landscape where some worker dude is living with his family, he's only going to go so far. There's a water hole. So we go straight to the water hole. We check around to look for snares and so on. And so they built up a pattern, and everything was logged on GPS and so on. So we could build this map of where the risks and the threats were and so on. That was smart. And they did this. And if a tourist drives past, they can speak eloquently, like a hobby on the beach, Good evening, sir. What are you doing here? Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy your stay. So they built up an institutional memory or a knowledge of the landscape that they worked on. So they could say, don't worry about that car. That's Mrs. Jones. She drops us off at school every day. Don't worry about that guy. He's the building contractor working on that place. We checked him. He's fine. There's a vehicle that we don't recognize. Let's stop that guy. So they could profile And at the same time, they could say, hang on, I walked this section this morning on my beat, and that rock wasn't turned upside down. Now it is. The shiny side is down. Something came past here. Let's look. Oh, buffalo. Buffalo knocked the rock over. It's fine. Or a human footprint. Oh dear, what's this? Let's follow up further. So that's a keen observation. So I always say it's their eyes and their ears that are their most valuable assets here. That's my favorite story, is that in that short space of time, they managed to knock that poaching threat on its head really quickly. And it hasn't flared up again because they just keep the pressure up all the time. And we've got other stories. My other favorite anecdotal stories is during a patrol, during the height of the poaching shenanigans here, that was 2017. They were patrolling on the northern section of Baluli, way up there near Pellavore. And they saw a vehicle come past, and there was a lady tied and bound on the back with a gag in her mouth. And she was struggling on the back of a bucky. And the Mambas are on the inside, and this is now a provincial road, the R40 on the outside. And they called it into the ops room, and they said, this lady's been abducted. It must be. So they chased after it, but they're on this bouncy gravel road, and they're trying to keep up with this vehicle. And the poor Land Rover has never gone so fast in its life, And they eventually called the ops room. They got a roadblock set up by the police, stopped the vehicle, and on the back, and they drove straight through the fence. They just said, to hell with it. We have to rescue this auntie. Straight through the fence, and rescued this lady that had actually been kidnapped by this man. And they rescued her life. And I thought to myself, wow, they could have just turned a blind eye. That's not a wildlife crime. But these are people that care about their kin, first of all, and any antisocial behavior on the landscape. They arrested a firewood poacher the other day, and I was so soft on the guy. I was like, no, you can't arrest somebody for cutting firewood, blah, blah, blah. And they said, no, he's also a bushmeat poacher. This is a gateway crime, because I've taught them that term. So that guy's cutting firewood now. But I promise you, he's also set snares. And we looked around, and they found 19 snares or whatever it was that the same guy had set. Went to his house, found that he had all this dead animal stuff hanging up all over the show and whatever. So they're bobbies on the beat. Antisocial behavior, not acceptable on this landscape.
Mm-hmm. No, they're trained for the environment. They know their details, their specializations. I mean, that genuinely is impressive, and it's. I mean, there's so much to it. I wish. Has anybody written a book about this? Because they really should get these stories out there.
There's been quite a lot of people that have started, but then I always lose focus. I just want to ask the guys in the background, guys, let's just keep the ambient noise down. I'm sitting in the research house, by the way. This is all the researchers are running around here like crazy, researching stuff. Okay. It's the only place we have permanent electricity and Wi-Fi, so that's why I'm down here now. But no, it would make sense.
Nobody's finished a story about this?
No, if somebody sat down with the Mambas themselves and asked them to talk about their daily patrols where the buffalo chased them and they had to climb up a tree, and the one lady threw a walkie-talkie at the lions, and the rest of them were like, why did you do that? Because that's the only thing we've got to call for help, And they had this pair of night vision goggles, and they bumped in. They were sitting and waiting. We call it observation post, and they must report any poaching activity. And lions came and bumped them and got the night vision goggles. They're worth a fortune, those things. And the lions ate this thing up, and they presented it back to me on a piece of string, all chewed up and so on. It's fascinating. Every night, every day, they've got something to tell.
Yeah, well, hopefully we can inspire someone that watches this to perhaps, just document this, because I think there's like the stories are the ones that people go for. It's like those. It's the social media posts that you see that make people go, oh, this is cool. This is what I can care about. And hopefully, of the 1,000 people or thousands of people that watch these videos, just like a few of them are motivated enough to actually help, actually do something about it, whether that's writing a story or, giving financial support. So on that line, I want to ask, how can people help the Black Mambas? Like if they believe in what you do as an organization, what can they practically do after watching this video to help the Black Mambas?
Thanks very much, Petrus. I must give credit where credit is due. The Extended Public Works Program, which is administered by the National Parks Board through the Department of Environmental Affairs, that is a subsidy that we receive for the Black Mambas. And we've been very, very grateful for that. Without that, we'd be dead in the water. The rest of the money we have to raise. So that's about 30% of our budget. And the rest we have to raise externally. So, we have a website, and there is a way that you can donate on the website. I must admit, I'm pretty doff with that sort of stuff. But there is a mechanism where people can go on. It's easy. It's under the Transfrontier Africa because that's the NGO, the umbrella NGO. And then on the website, you'll see the Black Mambas have got their own whole page or whatever you call it. But the bush babies is something that I struggle to raise. I struggle to raise money for the Black Mambas, sure. But I struggle even harder to raise money for the bush babies. And that's 1,300 kids that the Mambas interact with every day in those communities. Those kids come to our resource center or to the 10 primary schools, probably mostly because they get a daily meal there. So the Mambas have got these big pots and they cook like pop and chicken feet and eggs and whatever we can afford at the time, and some cabbage and whatever comes out of our vegetable gardens that are grown all over in the community. They've got these little strategic vegetable gardens. But if, to feed those kids, how do you educate somebody if the education facilities are so shitty that it's 56 degrees Celsius inside? I measured it. It's 46 outside. It's a very hot day in summer. You go inside that room and it's 10 degrees hotter. How can any child sit there, especially on an empty stomach, and expect to absorb information? They're not listening, How do you expect the teacher to go to work when they haven't got a desk and a chair to sit on? I mean, we've got these desks and there were 3 kids crowded around a desk that's made for 1 person. That's how bad things were. And that's been one of our biggest missions, is to fix up the schools, fix up a resource center, central location, because COVID hit us hard, and we couldn't get into the schools and everything. The schools were closed, so we had to think off the bat, and we built this little resource center thing. But we need to give those kids a daily meal, and then we have a captive audience, and then the Mambas can go berserk with their lesson plans, which are integrated into the curriculum. So it's not as if they're learning something different. It's just that we take mathematics and use that to demonstrate how many drops of water coming from that leaky tap it will take to fill a 1,000-liter JoJo tank, and so on. So it's all very cleverly worked out. I've got very good staff that work these things out spectacularly. That's where I need the resources, teaching aids, stimulating materials for the kids at primary school level. What else? We do a lot of bush camping with them as well. So they come and they work with the Mambas and they spend some time in the bush. And believe it or not, we actually need tents for that, because it gets a bit scary sleeping out in the riverbed without a tent.
Yeah.
These are things that we don't have money for. Tents, any camping room, particularly tents. We take them into the Kruger Park property to see the tourist facilities and everything, to develop that value system. Teaching aids, materials, whatever teachers use in classrooms. This is something that we can't get enough of. Batteries for camera traps to help the Mambas. They use a lot of technology on the landscape as well. What else? Solar panels, vehicles. My goodness. We're using Land Rovers from the 80s and the 90s that we've dollied up and sent back out on the road, and they break down all the time. Not because they're Land Rovers, I just want to point that out there, but because they're bloody old now, and we have to literally use bits of plumbing and wire and bri grids and anything we can weld up and so on. So anything for shock absorbers, tires, fuel, just to keep the vehicles going.
Yeah, both donations and finances.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You'll see on our website, it's got quite a lot of information about what we do, and then people would get a good idea of how they could actually assist.
Okay,
cool. A lot of people think
link those.
Just about money. Yeah, it's not just about money there, Petros. It's also about the other things that I've mentioned now as well.
No, I mean, I can imagine that. I agree with that. It's just that, for most people that are very far away and don't have context in the area, providing financial support is a way easier and more direct way, a way more actionable way. I mean, I think there's this fantastic video online of Steve Irwin where he's talking with a reporter, and he's sitting there along with his wife, and the so the interviewer is asking him about this stuff costs so much money. It's like why are you asking almost so much money? It's like, money. I love money. I can't have enough of it. I want all the money. You know what? Because when I get that money, I'm going to buy land and I'm going to make it conservation in that fantastic Aussie accent. It's like, this is the reality of things. Is this stuff cost money? I mean, it's really it doesn't magically happen by the sweat of the back of somebody else alone. Like, they alone work really hard to get this thing, and then the financial support. So that's why we strive to inspire people to support in any way possible, and that way is definitely one that enables you guys to do the most things. And any resource people can spare in the area.
Thanks, Pedro. You're absolutely spot on. A lot of us in this arena are too embarrassed to ask for money. There's other NGOs out there that probably live a lifestyle from out of space, because they're very good at asking for money. We are not. And if you see what Steve Irwin has done with his money, his family is very closely or very fond of us, and they visit the Mambas every year for the last few years. It's only because of COVID that they did not. They've even taken the Mambas across to the Australia Zoo to show them what's going on over there, so it's the Irwins, the whole way that they've constructed their conservation plans and ethos and everything is a huge inspiration for us. Huge. And that's the one thing that they always say is do not be afraid to ask for money just because you feel guilty. Most of us come and live out here in this arena because we want to get away from society's norms and standards and, not be subjected to the financial whims of the world or whatever, the prison that it forms. But you're right. Without it, you can't. Imagine if I could put those Mambas in a vehicle that is safe, that is not going to break down tonight on patrol in a herd of elephants, for example, or run out of oil and the engine seizes and then we have to fix it on the side of the road.
Yeah.
That would be spot on, but we just don't have the resources for that.
Yeah. So that's exactly what's important. We'll definitely make sure to provide the links to relevant sites there and just encourage people. But just before we end off, we've used an hour of your time. I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to talk. I mean, I'm really passionate about this. I think it's awesome what you do. I think the approach to it is so novel and get people so fired up about it, way more than perhaps than what they're used to. It's important to not let apathy set in. At least that's what I can say from my comfortable environment, my green screen office down in the Cape. That's what I can say about it if I'm able to. So I want to give a last opportunity. If you want to add or say anything or plug anything, please by all means do so now, and then we'll end off.
Pedros, I just want to say thanks very much for the opportunity. I know I rambled on a lot, but I don't have an audience, and you asked some pretty spot-on questions that I think really needed to be said. So I thoroughly enjoyed the interview. We don't really get the opportunity to explain these things in any other forum. So yeah, good questions. And
thank you. It genuinely was my pleasure as well. So in that regard, we're going to try and share this as much as possible. At least for the people that have made it thus far in the video that's still watching, I just want to say, if you believe in what Craig Spencer and the Black Mambas, work for and what they believe in, the best thing you can do, even if you're not able or you don't want to support, is actually just to share this with other people. Get the worldview out there, get the perspective out there, get people thinking and talking about this, because that's how to get these things bowling, rolling. And even, we've seen the statistics in terms of how people act on calls for charity. It's the vast majority watch it and a small minority act upon it. So our best strategy is just to get the vast majority to talk about it. So those of you that have made it thus far, please by all means share this. It obviously helps out the channel from our perspective as well. So that's also a great support in that regard. So thank you so much to Craig. Thank you so much to the Black Mambas for the work that they do. And thank you so much for the viewer who made it this far. This has been WorldView. Awesome. Thank you for watching.
Thank you very much.